Hey guys, Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling coming at you with a little New Japan content today for a change. We're going to be going over the best match from each night of the G1 Climax 34. And in case you didn't have time to watch each match, which is not surprising, who would? There's like 150 matches in the tournament. I'm going to be going through and giving you my personal pick for the greatest match from each night, along with what I rated each match on a 1 through 5 star rating scale. If you're interested in more New Japan content, I am going to be releasing a video in the future giving my overall thoughts on the tournament, what I thought the best booking decisions were, and who were the best and worst standout wrestlers from the tournament. But in this video, we're just focusing on the matches. So let's get into it with our first match. Night 1, Yota Tsuji versus Konosuke Takeshita, 4.5 stars. So for me, this was definitely one of the matches that I was most excited to watch because Konosuke Takeshita, I think, is one of the most underrated wrestlers in the world right now, and Yota Tsuji is personally my favorite New Japan wrestler going forward right now. So seeing these two come together, I knew their styles would blend well, so I was really excited to see what was going to happen, and I was not in any way disappointed. These guys had a blow-away great match, just like you would expect them to, and really, for me, there's nothing better in wrestling than just seeing a move executed perfectly. And it can be a more complex move like a German suplex that Takeshita always hits, or just something simple like a rising knee strike or a forearm. But everything in this match was on point and looked perfect. And I can't really say a lot about this match other than it was two of the best wrestlers in the world going at each other for about 15 minutes, and it's a definite must watch. Night 2, Yota Tsuji versus David Finlay, 4.5 stars. So I'm obviously a huge fan of Yota Tsuji, but I'm also a big fan of David Finlay. Even though I feel his matches can be a bit drab sometimes, I feel like when he gets put into that big main event slot against a fiery babyface, he always delivers in a big way, and Yota Tsuji was the perfect foil to him. Even though he was the sort of come from behind babyface, he never really looked like an underdog. And these two did a great job working together, not only to put on a great match, but to say, these are the kind of main event matches you can expect a year, 5 years, 10 years down the line in New Japan, because we are the future and we are cementing ourselves as such. And really, they just put on this classic main event style with a slow burn start, some more chain and technical wrestling before hitting these sort of bigger signature moves. And like I said in the last bit, everything looked impactful, everything looked fluid and awesome. It was really a great match and a treat to see the two futures of New Japan tie it up again. Night 3, Shota Umino versus Gabe Kidd, 4.25 stars. So this match for me was similar in quality to Callum Newman versus Zack Sabre Jr. earlier in the card, but what made this match better for me and what elevated it from a 4-star to a 4.25 star match was the energy that this match displayed. Gabe Kidd always has this very unique, chaotic style around his matches that really not a lot of other wrestlers have. He's able to turn a match from a grappling exchange in the middle of the ring, two guys trying to win a match, win a point, win a belt, anything like that, to a real street fight. And putting Shota Umino in that match added an interesting dynamic, because towards the beginning of the match, he was playing this babyface who's not used to wrestling this style and is a little bit out of his depth. But over the course of the match, slowly begins to incorporate more moves into his repertoire that level him up to match Gabe Kidd's aggressive style. And really, the crowd was super into this match. They were on the hook for everything these guys were throwing at them, and it really elevated this match above anything else on the Night 3 card as a result. Night 4, Yu Uemura versus Konosuke Takeshita, 4.75 stars. So when I started watching Night 4, I was really excited to talk about El Phantasmo versus Yota Tsuji, because I was so sure that that was going to be the best match of the night and make it on this list. But then the main event happened, and it blew every other match in the tournament so far away. Konosuke Takeshita and Yu Uemura went out there and just had a really unexpected blow-away great match. And it's weird that I say unexpected because Konosuke Takeshita is one of the greatest wrestlers on the planet, but Yuya, he's sort of a guy who more favors the basic fundamentals of wrestling over the big bombastic hybrid style that we see with Takeshita. So prior to this, I had never really seen any examples of him having a match that really blew me away and took me back with how great it was. But this match really is an example of it. By far the best match in the tournament so far. Really a contrast in styles presented these two as two different people. Yuya, the underdog babyface who the crowd really got behind, and Takeshita looked like this dominant world beater throughout the match. And the last 3 or 4 minutes of this match are some of the hottest pro wrestling you will see in the entire year. Night 5, Shingo Takagi versus Callum Newman, 3.75 stars. So this was the first night of the tournament that didn't really have an amazing blow-away must-see match. The closest we got was Shingo versus Callum here, and really it was a very good match that never really bordered on great. Shingo, of course, is phenomenal, one of the best wrestlers in New Japan, and I would personally say one of the best wrestlers on the planet. And this was the first real look I got at Callum Newman in a big setting like this. I've seen him wrestle in New Japan before, but never on this big of a stage with this much stakes. And while he looked good, it seemed a lot of his wrestling was trying to emulate other wrestlers, specifically Will Ospreay, but he couldn't really match up to that level, and it seemed to diminish him as a result. Because the entire time when he was hitting these hook kicks and trying to go for an Oz cutter, they didn't look as good as Ospreay, and the whole time I was just thinking, well, I'd rather be seeing Ospreay wrestle Shingo over you. So it really just didn't work for me. Overall, it was a good match, but at some points I really could see the strings of the match, meaning I could see where they were going next, and as a result I could never really get lost in the action. So even though, yes, technically it was a very good match and they hit a lot of cool moves, it just never really got to that next level for me. Night 6, Hiroki Goto versus Yota Tsuji, 4.25 stars. So this is a rematch of the finals of the New Japan Cup from earlier in the year, where Yota Tsuji beat Hiroki Goto, and it has a very interesting story ingrained in it, with Yota Tsuji being this new up-and-coming person who's taking New Japan by hold and taking everything he wants, going up against Goto, who is really one of the final remaining members of the old guard of New Japan, the old talent who made New Japan great in the early 2010s. And there's an interesting dynamic in the match as a result. And one thing I'll say about Goto is prior to this tournament, I had seen him wrestle quite a bit, but mainly as a tag wrestler with Yoshihashi and Bishamon. And this tournament did an absolutely phenomenal job about making me appreciate how great a wrestler Hiroki Goto is. And this match is one of many that went to proving that for me. It is a slow start in the beginning, but when it gets going, it never stops. And it does a very good job about always building on what came before it and pushing to what's coming next. And it really just felt like this constant building of momentum towards a huge crescendo and a very exciting finish at the end. Night 7, Shingo Takagi versus Gabe Kidd, 4.75 stars. So this match for me upset Konosuke Takeshita versus Yuya Uemura as the best match of the tournament so far, and this would stand for me as the best match of the league round matches, meaning the matches before the semifinals. And that really is a testament to how good this match is, in my opinion. I feel like often these kinds of matches where there's not a lot of big moves hit, it's merely just striking exchanges, they can be hit or miss depending on how well the wrestlers do to build the atmosphere around the match and get the crowd involved. But this match struck every tone perfectly. They were always aggressive, even from the opening bell, and everything they hit looked super impactful the entire time. And really, this match seemed like a real fight because they avoided some of the old pro wrestling cliches. Like when they were doing striking exchanges, let's say they were doing a slap exchange, for example, Gabe Kidd would slap Shingo and then Shingo would slap him back. And you're expecting them to do this big back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. But off like the second strike, Gabe Kidd just goes down because it was such a hard strike. It really influenced this air of unpredictability in the match that sort of held throughout, and it was awesome. There's nothing big and flashy to it. It was a lot of slaps, forearms, clotheslines, lariats, but everything they did looked absolutely devastating, and it really did an amazing job of leveling each of these wrestlers up in the tournament. Shingo, previously to this, had sort of had a lackluster year, in my opinion, but this tournament was really a turning point for him, and it was this match that started that turn. And Gabe Kidd, as I've talked about in this video already, is a great hand, but this match really elevated him and said, I can go with the best, and I could be in the main event of these G1 Climax nights. And really, out of any other match I'm going to talk about in this video, this one's probably my favorite, and this one is my biggest recommendation. Night 8, Konosuke Takeshita versus David Finlay, 4.25 stars. I definitely feel that the bookers of this tournament made a very wise decision putting Takeshita in so many main event matches, because the G1 is a tournament that is conducive historically to a lot of great matches happening, and putting Takeshita in so many main event spots ensures that you have those great matches. And pairing him with David Finlay is also a really good idea because, as I said before, Finlay is a guy who really steps up his game when he gets put in the main event, and this was no exception. There were some great spots in this match, like at one point Finlay drove Takeshita through the barricade really hard, like wicked hard, and it surprised me how impactful it looked. And at another point, Takeshita did this like flipping senton to the outside on top of a bunch of chairs with Finlay underneath them. A lot of great stuff in this match, added on to by Gabe Kidd's commentary. He is always a delight to have on commentary, especially when a member of the War Dogs is in the ring. There were some weird ref bumps and lame interference spots at the end, but really it did not do a lot to derive from the fun this match was, and truly this was a very fun match. Night 9, Shingo Takagi versus Zack Sabre Jr., 4 stars. This was a very good match that never really teetered on great, with the exception of one of the final spots where Shingo Takagi dropped Zack like straight on his head with the Last of the Dragon. It was a crazy spot. But outside of that, this match never really got into that top tier that you would assume these two guys could go to. And I think that Zack, prior to this match, was having sort of a disappointing tournament, mainly because he wasn't being booked in those big main event matches that you would expect him to. But towards the latter half of this tournament, he really started to get into the story of, I want to be the new face of New Japan. I want to be the guy going forward. And that started to become reflective in his matches. And this was the starting point for it, because he's going against a guy like Shingo, who has every step of the way in this tournament had great matches and great storytelling. Really, these two guys came together, and this was a turning point for Zack in the tournament. However, I feel like they were holding something back in this match because, as I said, it was a very good match, but it never really hit the peak you would expect a match between these two competitors to have. Night 10, Hiroki Goto versus Konosuke Takeshita, 4.5 stars. This was the semi-main event match in what was easily the best night of action in the tournament so far. In the main event, Yota Tsuji and Ren Narita had a good main event match. And earlier in the card, El Phantasmo was fighting Yu Uemura in a very good match, and Hanare and Jeff Cobb had a big, meaty fight. And all of the matches on the card were very good, but none could really stand up to Takeshita versus Goto. And at this point, hearing that Konosuke Takeshita versus fill-in-the-blank wrestler had the best match on any night in the G1 shouldn't really be a surprise, because Takeshita seemed to really be on a mission in this tournament to prove that he was the best wrestler in the world. And given the lack of opportunities he had to do that in AEW, it was really nice to see him mix it up with everyone and anyone in this tournament and always go out and have great matches. And as this is his second mention on the list, Hiroki Goto really also shined in this match. I would say Goto looked better in this match than Takeshita. He was going out and telling this tournament-long story of him trying to hold back these new people coming in and trying to prove that he still had some merit and some worth and he could still win the big one. And that informed the story of the match, of Takeshita dominating early and Goto really coming back and making these big fiery babyface moves towards the end. And I think Gabe Kidd on commentary really nailed the tone of this match when he said that Takeshita was an outsider coming in trying to dominate their company, and Goto is someone who has been around here for 20 years and has always given his all to it. And that really informed the crowd reaction to Goto, just being so into him, so behind him. It made the final stretch of this match, the last 5 minutes or so, absolutely molten hot, and everybody was behind Goto, and seeing that going into the finishing stretch of this match was just so exciting. Night 11, Shingo Takagi versus Sanada, 4.5 stars. So for several nights in the tournament so far, there have been pretty boring cards, and I've taken matches and gone, yeah, I guess that's the best match, just because look at all the other stuff it's paired with. And though this was a very boring night for G1 action, this was by far not one of those cases, because this was a phenomenal match. Sanada isn't really a wrestler who I commonly associate with great matches unless he's in there with Kazuchika Okada, but he really showed up here because this was in no way a carry job by Shingo Takagi like I assumed it would be. Sanada really came in with a lot of fiery energy in his work and in his action. And he is purposefully not a very charismatic guy because that is the character that he portrays. So it seemed like Shingo Takagi came out that night and said, okay, you're not going to display a lot of charisma. I'm going to display enough charisma for the both of us. Because he was playing to the crowd and pantomiming to the camera in ways that Takagi doesn't normally do. And it was just a really fun match as a result. But it didn't really take away from the physical back and forth exchanges that they were putting forward. And really, they had what I would consider to be a surprisingly great match. Night 12, El Phantasmo versus Konosuke Takeshita, 4.5 stars. While this is an undoubtedly great match, I think it's getting a little bit too much praise online. I definitely don't think it's a 5-star match like Dave Meltzer has given it in the Wrestling Observer, and I don't even think it's either man's best match of the tournament like ratings on Cage Match seem to dictate. But that isn't to say this wasn't a very, very good match. I would say a great match even. There were some great spots in this match, and probably the best spot of the tournament so far with Takeshita giving El Phantasmo a crunchy through the table. And they told a really good story about Takeshita really being the superior athlete and the outcome of the match never being in question, but both Takeshita and the audience being surprised by El Phantasmo's heart that he was putting into this match after lacking it through so long in the tournament. And those two dynamics together came and put on a really entertaining and unique match. A match that had a dynamic that's not really seen in the rest of the tournament. Night 13, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Gabe Kidd, 3 3/4 stars. This was a very good, hard-hitting match, and it was fought at a really frenetic pace. Both guys were really going back and forth, and were trying to emulate the style of match where there's a lot less big moves and a lot more strikes. I felt like in this match, ZSJ was trying a little bit too hard to come off like a badass and to try to meet Gabe Kidd where he is in his character, and it didn't really work. It came off as a little goofy. Like every time Gabe hit Zach with a clothesline or a forearm, Zach would like scream really loud as if to portray aggression on his part, but it always just came off as a little bit goofy. I think that Zach adapted to have a Gabe Kidd style match rather than the two sort of meeting in the middle between their two styles, and I do think the match was worse off as a result. I think this is a match where if it had taken place on any other night, probably wouldn't have made this list, but since it was on a night with not a lot of great action, it does get elevated a little bit. And that's not to say this was a bad match. It was a good, very good match, but it never really passed the hurdle of great, and this won't be a match that'll be remembered for very long. Night 14, Boltin Oleg versus Konosuke Takeshita, 4.25 stars. Who could have seen this match coming? I mean, seriously, this was such a great match, and to say that about Konosuke Takeshita is not surprising, but Boltin Oleg prior to this has never really been treated seriously in the tournament. He was always in the opening match that lasted 5 to 10 minutes usually. He was the guy in the tournament who's there to just score 4 points and just be another body there, and I think they were trying to treat this as sort of a learning opportunity for him, or maybe to showcase a new face in the division for the fans. I don't really know why he was in here, but before this, he had never really shown me a lot to be excited about. But then in this match, he just came alive and he showed a fire that I had never seen in any of his matches before in the G1 or prior in his 6-man matches with Toru Yano and Hiroshi Tanahashi. He was so effectively able to get the fans behind him in a way that is very rarely seen. This was a match that I would relate to Undertaker versus Jeff Hardy from the early 2000s, where Konosuke was coming in as the clear veteran going up against this sort of, even though he's a giant, this underdog babyface. And Boltin Oleg really leveling up his game to look on par with Konosuke Takeshita. It was just a ridiculous match, and the reason that I think I scored it so highly is because it was such a pleasant surprise. You weren't expecting this match to be great. You were probably not even expecting it to be very good, and it was just such an over-delivery. It's amazing to watch, and I really recommend checking it out. Night 15, Sonata versus Zack Sabre Jr., 4.5 stars. Once again, this is another example of Sonata really showing up to play. And this is the best example of the tournament thus far of two wrestlers really playing a map-based counter game with each other, where every move one of them had, the other one had the answer for it and was able to transition into something of their own. And it was really, really nice to see. Like, it was a very fluent match, and though this may not have had those big moments that make you jump out of your seat and scream, it was just, as a wrestling fan, sometimes seeing technical wrestling and the graps is just a nice thing. And unlike matches previously on the card where they have these back and forth sequences where each guy's just counter, it never really felt forced. It always felt genuine, and like these two guys were really in a struggle and almost playing a game of chess to see who could one-up each other. And I really loved this match as a result. Night 16, Yota Tsuji versus Jeff Cobb, 3.75 stars. So this was another example of a match that it came on a pretty lackluster card, so it was a case of me picking this and saying, yeah, I guess this is the best match of the night, versus really jumping out at me and saying that was a great match, that is a must-see match. I wasn't really impressed by Jeff Cobb's performance in this G1. It just seems like he didn't really have a lot of motivation to put on great matches and be a standout star, and that sort of reflected in this match. While it did have the makings of a great match, it had the framework and the spots and the makeup of a great match, the two guys just didn't really mesh well together in the ring, and there was some hesitation between spots, and in wrestling, something that takes an extra second or a half second seems like a year. It just seems so glaring, and there was a lot of instances in this match where they just didn't flow together like you'd expect them to. So while it was, yes, a very good match, really not a strong recommendation on my part. Night 17, Yota Tsuji versus Konosuke Takeshita, 4.25 stars. So we are now out of the league stages and into the finals, in this case the qualifiers to see who will make it into the semifinals, and we're getting a rematch from night 1 between Yota Tsuji and Konosuke Takeshita. And while I don't feel this was as good as their first encounter, it still was a very great match. The difference between this match and their first match is that they had a lot more time for this one. This went somewhere between 20 and 25 minutes, and they had the more traditional main event style match as a result, where they had a slow burn at the beginning before really getting into it in the last 7 or 8 minutes. And I feel like it did diminish the match a little bit. Their first match was a lot more heated, go, go, go energy, just throwing all their big moves at each other, whereas this one was a little bit more of a slow burn. But that's not to say this isn't a great match, because the final 7 or 8 minute stretch of this match, as I said, are absolutely awesome. Them throwing a bunch of big moves at each other in what I feel was better than their first match. The final 8 minutes of this match are better than the first. All the moves look snug and effective in a way that you would expect from these two and that you saw in their first match. And it really, even if you are taken out a little bit by the slow beginning, that last stretch forces you back in and draws you back into the action of this match. Night 18, Shingo Takagi versus Zack Sabre Jr., 4.75 stars. So I said earlier in the video that I feel like Zack and Shingo left something on the table with their league round match, but they took everything missing from that match and pushed it into this match. This was such a great match, and really the match you would hope Zack and Shingo would have together. They were able to reach this sweet spot in a match that only a few special matches are able to get, where every near fall at the end has you biting and draws you into the action of the match. There was one near fall in particular where Shingo hit Last of the Dragon, which was the move he used to put Zack away in their previous match, and it was such a great near fall and so effective. And that is just one example of several that were in this match, and they told such a great story. And I feel like, especially in a match like this where the obvious winner is a little telegraphed and everyone knew Zack was going to win, having those near falls emanate as much as they did took a lot of work to build to, and they both did a phenomenal job. I think Zack had sort of a lackluster first half of the tournament, but was really building in his second half. And when I watched this match, I thought this was the crescendo of the tournament. This was his peak. But then I watched Night 19, Yota Tsuji versus Zack Sabre Jr., 4.75 stars. Though I do hold a special place in my heart for Shingo versus Gabe from the earlier part of this tournament, this was objectively the best match of the tournament. It had the big fight feel, the grandeur, the most time out of any match in the tournament, the biggest audience support, and two guys who really showed up to put on a great match. And there were a lot of things that were great about this match. First thing I want to talk about is the crowd, because they had an interesting dynamic in this where whenever someone was on top, they were cheering for the other person. So for example, let's say Zack was on top at one point dominating Yota. The crowd would really get behind Yota. And as soon as those roles swapped and Yota was on top, they really got behind Zack. And it was just this back forth energy that was really engaging and fun to watch. And both wrestlers really bought it. Zack had great limb work throughout. Yota was using his big power moves to effect, and they were both doing amazing counter wrestling. And this was just the kind of match that you would expect from the G1 finals. Just a classic match that'll be so much fun to go back and rewatch years down the line. And not only for the amazing in-ring action, but it also felt like a pivotal moment in the history of New Japan. 2012 was the last time that a G1 Climax final featured two wrestlers who had never won the tournament before. And since then, it's just sort of been the constant regurgitation of Okada and Naito and Tanahashi and bringing those people in again and again. And it felt like so long since we've really seen two new faces of this company, which is what we are getting here. And not only in this match, but also just throughout the tournament, it seems like New Japan was trying to say, here is a crop of our new guys who we're going to start taking seriously and who we're going to start pushing at the top of our cards as our main event. And if this match is indicative of the way that New Japan is going to be booking its main event scene in the future, I am all here for it. And that's the list. The best match from every night of G1 Climax 34. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Did you agree or disagree with some of my decisions from this video? What did you think of the G1 Climax from this year as a whole? Did you feel it was a tournament like the ones we got in the mid-2010s, or was it a little bit underwhelming for you? If you enjoyed this video, I will be coming out with some more G1 Climax content in the upcoming week. I'm going to be doing a tier list where I rank each G1 Climax participant based on their performance in this year's tournament. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing, as it really does help me out. And I have been Isaiah for Hot Tag Wrestling. I will see you guys next time.